it's like normally in these cells, when you have grain boundaries, where there's junctions between the crystallites, these are not big crystals like our silicon. You can't make these big crystals. These are little tiny crystals. The boundaries between crystals in this material are called grain boundaries, and normally they poison the cell. They make the solar cell not very good. They trap the mobile electrons and prevent them from coming out. There's something magical about coperium diselenide that it does not do that. So it was very, when people, in the early days, people were trying everything, pyrite, zinc phosphide, you name it. So coperium diselenide worked well in the lab. It got momentum. Nobody could they still haven't figured out why it works so well, but it does work well. The problem has been scaling it to high volume manufacturing.
Okay, we're going to take one last question, and then we're going to take a break so you guys can get more food, more beer, more wine. I always push the beer and wine. I don't know why that is. So one last question. We'll take about a 10-minute break.
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about dye-sensitized technology, which is starting to be manufactured in Wales, and which, as I understand it, even though it has lower efficiency ratings, it can work in low light conditions so that it can gather electricity or gather energy throughout the day, or even in high latitude areas?
Yeah, it's bunk. I mean, it's the first place, when your efficiencies are way down in the 2 to 3% range, it's very hard to make a solar cell that's useful. Even if it's cheap, you can't afford to put it on your roof. But it's an example of sort of how you package something. So it doesn't work very well in sunlight, but it works okay on a really cloudy day when there's no sun. It doesn't produce much power because there's no sun, but its efficiency is decent. So the problem with the dye-sensitized cells has been that the dyes degrade, and it's been a deuce of a problem. All of the original companies that tried to do it ended up trying to seal the liquid into these panels, and the way it would work is if any oxygen got in there, it would poison the dye. So they had to seal the glass. The one company, the Australian company that finally gave up, had 4 layers of glass on their dye-sensitized cells. So there were 2 layers of glass sealed. That wasn't good enough, so then they put it into another 2 layers of glass, and then sealed that, and maybe that was going to be good enough. So now, think about it. Here you have a panel that produces 1/10 or 1/7 as much power per unit area as a standard panel, and weighs 4 times as much for the same area. So
the company that I saw that was producing it, they didn't put it in glass. They put it in something plastic.
right. So they feel that they've gotten. Right. So there are some people that feel that they've gotten plastics that are sufficiently impervious to water vapor diffusion that the cells will last, but I don't think so. I mean, there are applications for like consumer electronics where it doesn't have to be outdoors all the time, like for cell phone chargers, calculator things. It could be used for that. There's applications in the military where you don't expect it to be used very long, and you can use it like that. You can roll it out in the desert, charge up your night vision goggles. Those are the kind of applications that people have in mind. But for power production panels, my view is it's open. My humble view.
All right, with that, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a 10-minute break, go to the restroom, get some more beer, get some more wine. We're going to come back, and we're actually going to dive more into questions of what's kind of burning in your mind, why are you here tonight, and really foment more of a dialogue in the second half. So come prepared to have with your questions, and then we're actually going to get into the actual science of how it works. Again.
Okay, thanks for sticking around. So what we're going to do is going to do a quick picture show, and then we're going to take questions. And if there's any time at the end, I'm going to do a little simplified how solar cells actually work. Put some of the science into this instead of business personality. So right now, SunPower is organized into 4 basically business segments, illustrated by these pictures here. There's up on the upper left is commercial roofs. This was the PowerLight portion of our, we merged our company with PowerLight. They were the largest integrator commercial roofs and really created that business. Prior to Power Light, people that put panels on commercial roofs put them on steel racks and tilted them south, because the lore was you needed to face south to face the sun. But the penalty that they paid is that there was all this steel to put up there, hundreds of roof penetrations that all had to be sealed, and it was a very laborious process. And Tom Dinwiddie, the founder of Power Light, came up with a neat idea of just lay the panels on the roof, and came up with a clever way of doing it such that they wouldn't blow away. So he could essentially go in and just lay the panels on a roof in an afternoon and do a whole building. And that was an advantage that just allowed them to totally dominate the commercial roof business. In the lower left, there's what we call the commercial ground mount business. This is still on the customer side of the meter. These panels are feeding electricity directly into the building, but in the lower left, it's a parking lot structure. So this is shading people's cars, and the owner of the building next to the parking lot is using that energy. One of our newest market segments is in the upper right, and that's new homes. This is really a killer application, if you will, because what fully costs half as much to install a solar panel as to make it, and this is on a roof. This is a hard nut to swallow. I mean, we who make solar cells don't like that. I mean, it's you know, we do all these things I told you about, refining silicon, blah blah blah. Go to all of this and build these giant factories and make these solar cells, and then some character charges us the same amount to carry it up on the roof, and we go,
Those characters happen to be in the back of the room.
Yeah.
There's some solar installers back there.
So then we discovered that it actually is hard to do. And there's a reason for that. So, and one of the ways to get around that problem is to build it into the house. The poor installer, if you put yourself in their shoes, you know... Seriously. Oh yeah, right. You know, seriously. You know, there's some guy calls up and says, "I'd really like to have solar on my house, and how much will it cost?" And they say, "Well, I got to go out and do a quote." And you go out and you measure his roof, and you try and figure out where to put the inverter, and you say, "Well, there's a chimney here and a tree there," and you scratch your head and you do a design, and then you quote on it, and he says, "Wow, that's pretty expensive. I don't think I'll do it." And so it's a laborious sales process. It's very difficult. By doing it on a new home, you design it once, you stage your material one time during the housing development, and it all goes in, and you save quite a bit of those costs. In addition, you can actually build it into the roof. So you see here the panels are built into the roof. They become the shingles on the roof. And in fact, one of the impediments to barriers to wider spread PV use is that a lot of people think they're fairly ugly. If you build them into the roof, you really bypass that aspect of it. So there's a number of larger builders in California that are now doing this. Some have exclusively switched over to solar-powered houses. And interestingly, they're finding that in the current down market for housing, it's actually an advantage to have a solar-powered house. You can move a house and sell it in a development much easier. People love them. Then the old market that I mentioned that we were focused on before we discovered that the real value of PV was at the customer site is power plants, and those are beginning to come back. So in fact, we were having some discussions up here about what's going to happen in the power plant segment, but it's almost come full circle as our costs have come down enough now that we're getting close to viability for the larger power plants, and at the same time, the utilities and the politicians are all realizing we need more and more of this renewable energy. And you know the reasons why they're saying that, right? It's carbon dioxide, it's energy security, having to you know, defend the sources of oil so much. It's and I don't know, there's a couple others too. But anyway, all those forces are pushing. Oh, they were running out of oil, right? And so, in fact, I think it's becoming more and more clear. More and more people are now saying the peak oil day was May 6th, 2005, I think. My memory serves. That was the date the Earth pumped the most oil it ever has and probably ever will. So anyway, these forces are really causing people to say we really got to put as much PV in as possible, and one way to do it in a big scale is power plants. Let's go real fast through some of these pictures just to give you a flavor. This is a residential retrofit market, high-end customer, obviously. Next one, Germany ended up being the epicenter for PV because of the policies that were put in place in Germany. Just sucked all the modules out of the rest of the world. And over half the modules in the world go to Germany for installations such as this right now. And interestingly, this sunniest spot in Germany has less solar resource than the least sunny spot in the United States. So go figure. But anyway, next slide. Japan picked it up in a big way. In Japan, many of the houses, if not most of the houses, are prefabricated, factory-made houses shipped to the site and assembled there. And this is a natural for solar. This house is by Sekisui House in Japan, and using SunPower panels that were factory installed. Next slide. Coming closer to home, a regular Walnut Creek kind of house. Next slide. This is the house of the chairman of the board of Cypress Semiconductor, who decided he wanted an array, and he liked SunPower modules because he wanted the all-black ones because they're so good looking, and he thought that was great. And then he had this array installed, and his wife came home. She said it was the ugliest thing she'd ever seen in her whole life. But anyway, next slide. This example of a small commercial. This is the Los Altos Hills City Hall installation. Next slide. That's more of those roof thingies. Next slide. Oh, this gives you an example of an area that's called building integrated photovoltaics. This is more integrating the arrays directly into the building in some way. And this particular installation, the panels are mounted vertically on the side of the building there. You can see the arrays going up. This is in Battery Park, New York. And right where we're standing is roughly where the, not too far from where the World Trade Center was. This area has been turned into a green zone. And all of the new reconstruction in there has to meet very stringent environmental regulations, and there's all kinds of exciting things happening. Not just building integrated PV like you see here, but roof filtration systems with grass on the roofs and low volatile organics throughout the buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a real pilot test bed for the country on what you can do with zoning regulations that require green building. Next slide. This is an example of a commercial installation. This is the Microsoft campus here in Mountain View, once again with SunPower arrays on the roof. Next slide. We first started doing some larger power plants through a partner in Germany called Solon, and this is their systems, their tracking systems that follow the sun. And they were early in this resurgence of the power plant market, if you will, the large ground-mounted power plant market. There's been a lot of these now built since that one was made a couple years ago. Next slide shows, let's see, get it again. Now this is just a better picture of our most recent one, which is at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Some interesting things on this. This is basically a power light design, and what they did is they built foundations that are precast concrete that just sit there. This was very valuable from the site developer's point of view because this is some kind of Superfund site, and there's a membrane there that we could not penetrate without exposing toxic materials. So, so by just placing the foundations, just driving along with the truck and plopping the foundations down, we were able to avoid having to disrupt that roof or that ground membrane. So here's one example of combining a toxic site, brownfield as it's called, with and turning it from just something that doesn't do anything into a green power producing station. Next slide. We also don't want to forget that the third world market was the original real market for PV, and it's still important. All of our factories are in the Philippines, and so we have a very active outreach program in the Philippines. There's lots of islands there that are not electrified. And so we've been going to schools, electrifying schools, and putting lighting into people's houses and that sort of thing. It's pretty amazing when you see people children now that can have educational TV, have never seen TV in their life. It's also amazing. It always amazes me in the Philippines how neatly dressed everybody is. You know, we've got to know the Philippines very well. As I said, our factories are there. We spend a lot of time there, and we just love the place. And a lot of the people that work in our plant have dirt floors in their house, and there's no electricity, and they dress up their kids neater than the kids in Los Altos High School, right, when they go. It's unbelievable, the pride. So next slide. This represents a visionary thing for the future that people are talking about. The question is, where is PV going to go? And sure, you can do a lot with roof-mounted applications, reducing the energy consumption in buildings, but that can't do it all. And so there's a group of people that are thinking about what's next. And this is one idea that I like, just to give you an idea where it could go. This is, the proposal here is to build a giant transmission line from Cairo to Morocco, along northern Africa, and spring up towns along there that do nothing but build PV plants. And they hook into this grid. This is like, somebody I was talking to during the break said this is like towns that sprung up along railroads in the early history of the railroad system, or towns that sprung up around mines. Here, the towns spring up and they build PV plants. And one of the big costs in building a PV plant is the fact that it tends to be a construction project where you mobilize and you go to a site and you build it, you design it, you build it, and then you have to demobilize, go to another site. Imagine how much cost you could take out if that's what you did every day, is when you went to work, you drove to the edge of the PV field and started installing PV. That was your job. You can show that you can pull a tremendous amount of cost out. And you can also show that if you ran this line there and then hooked it throughout the underground cable through Tunisia to Europe, you could power all of Europe. These plants shown here can power all of Europe's electricity needs. So I think that as the costs come down, we can start thinking about PV taking a significant energy role. Right now we're, say, depends on who you ask, but say 0.1% of the world energy generation is solar. And we've been growing 40-some plus percent per year. Do the math. That is a factor of 30 every decade. Okay? 2 decades, it's a factor of 1,000. So that means if we can keep our industry growing at the same rate we have been growing, which we won't be able to, but if we could, in 20 years we could be supplying all the energy requirements. Okay, so that just shows you sort of the miracle of compound growth. And when people say, you always see from the oil industry or whatever, well, you know, solar's nice, but it's just insignificant and can never be a significant player. We really have to worry about you know, getting methane hydrates out of the ocean or something serious like that. Don't believe it. I mean, 20 years from now, it's going to go like that, and we could be in fact, Shell has a study that shows that by the year, even in their study, by the year 2040, the PV business is larger than the oil business. So by their admission, so it is growing, and it's pretty exciting.
Why don't we take a few questions now?
Yeah.
So in this model that you have here, where you talked about possibly transmitting this energy to Europe, with transmission you have energy loss, right? And in some cases I've heard it can even be as high as 40%. What do you think are the implications of trying to transmit the energy that great a distance?
Well, I think in this case it'd probably be more like 20% loss. So you just have to say, there's way more than 20% more sun in the Sahara Desert than there is in Europe, so you win, basically. Plus there's a lot more land, and to put all these PV plants. But it's going to have to pencil out. I mean, one of the sort of things that needs to happen is storage, because you know, much as we try to not mention it, the sun does go down at night, and so you know, you have to figure out what to do about that. It's not a problem now where we're just a little pimple on the utility power system, and anyway, their power tends to peak during the day because of air conditioning and things. So it's not a problem. But if it became obviously, if we became 100%, it would be a problem. Right? So some kind of storage needs to come forth to store the energy during the night. Now there are serious proposals, actually some of the same people doing this, that are looking at a global grid. And it's not a crazy idea, using basically connecting the entire Earth together with a giant superconducting transmission line, so that during the day in Africa you're supplying power to China, and during the day in China you're supplying power to Europe, and that sort of thing. The energy just circles the entire globe. Now that's obviously in the future and far out and everything, but it's scientifically there's nothing that says you couldn't do that.
I'll come up front in a second. I have sort of a pertinent question to where we stand now. Let's say I owned a cafe about this size in this neighborhood, maybe with this kind of lighting, and you know, my electric bill was like $1,000 a month. Does it make sense here where I live to install solar here? And what would be the payback?
Well, it can be found out real easy by going to our website. It probably does. The problem is, it could, in an area here, you may have high buildings around I haven't seen that may shadow the area that might cause a problem. But if that were not the case, it very likely would pencil out very nicely. In fact, we have an interesting thing in our this PG&E service territory that where we have a combination of what's called time of use rate structure, which means you pay more for your electricity. You can pay more if you elect into the time of use rate structure than during the day when it's more valuable to the utility, especially during the summer peak times, and you pay less at night when they have excess electricity available. The nice thing about PV is that it produces power during the day. So if you do net metering with time of use rates, you can easily be selling power during the day when this cafe is not using much power for lighting, selling power to the utility at 37 cents a kilowatt hour and buying it back at night for 8. And this can really jumpstart the economics of the whole proposition. So generally we see what you might call simple payback periods of 7 years or something. It kind of depends on the exact circumstance, which at first blush, when you say, gee, it takes 7 years to get my money out, you think, that doesn't sound that great. But then think about it. It's essentially equivalent to a 14% CD. It's essentially you're getting 1/7 of your money back every year forever. So there's not a whole lot of investments that are 100% secure that you can plop in and get 14% annual return out of the system, and it's a hedge against electricity going up, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, so yes, it probably would make sense.
Yeah, in your talk about the future, where do you see other types of power fit in, like wind or hydro? And do you, in what you do you combine some of these together for different ideas?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a mix of all kinds of renewable sources slowly becoming more and more prevalent. There was a very interesting study in Germany recently. By the way, there's a magazine in Germany called Photon International that is sort of the must-reading magazine in this business if you ever want to get the straight scoop. But anyway, they reported on a recent study in Germany that showed that now Germany not being a prime solar spot, if you look, they took 1,000 PV installations around the state and looked at them real time, at what their generating was, and they tend to balance out a lot because when it's cloudy in Hanover, it's not cloudy in Bavaria, et cetera, so that, whereas any individual installation may have bad days. If you average over the entire country, it averages out to some degree. If you throw wind into the mix, it averages out even more because the winter tends to be the windier time, and so and then you throw in anyway. What they found is that without storage, they could run the entire country of Germany on a combination of wind, PV, geothermal, with a biomass backup, which is just sort of making up in case everything fell apart all at once. There was no wind, no sun, etc. So yeah, well, I don't know where that's going. Yeah.
Just a quick question, just some of the socio-political ramifications that came up looking at this idea you have up here. And you'd mentioned a lot about how all this power generated in Africa would be going to supply Europe. And I was just curious what percentage of that would actually be used to power the developing African nations as well?
Well, they could use a lot of it. So it would be sort of like income for Africa from sales to Europe, but then some of it could be spent on their own power and developing agriculture and manufacturing along this transmission line. They could use as much as they wanted, I guess. It'd just be an economic decision. Export versus use. Yeah.
Two questions. One is, to what extent are utilities open to reverse metering for energy sources that are on the user end of the meter? And for instance, if I have solar panels or wind on my side of the meter, isn't there a concern that some utilities aren't willing to buy the power back?
Yeah, it's very utility specific, and in California we're blessed with fairly far-thinking utilities that are getting comfortable with that. But it's not universal. I have a friend who lives in Lubbock, Texas, who's a professor at Texas Tech, and he called me up one day and he said, "I'd like to put SunPower PV on my house. How do I do it?" And I said, "I don't know. We have a dealer in Texas," and I checked and we didn't. And I said, "Well, why don't you call the local utility, talk to them about how you might." What might be involved. And he called the utility, and the utility called back and said, "If you put PV on your house, we will sue you." So it goes the whole gamut. There's a lot of education. That's why we speak of one of the legislative agendas right now within the solar community is so-called national net metering standards, which would, right now the states can control all the regulations regarding utilities. And we're trying to get it in place, a uniform national net metering standard so that these things won't happen.
Is it a policy issue? I've heard the utilities argued that there's a technological reason for it.
They've always argued that, yeah. I mean, at first, if you go to the beginning of the grid connected, at first you couldn't put any on because it would really mess up the grid. And they would always say, and it's designed for power to go from the power plant to you, not the other way. You're going to mess it up. If you've had any electrical engineering at all, you have to sort of think about it and think, wait a minute, I'm getting fed a bill of goods here. But and then when a little bit started going in, they kept saying, well, it's going to cause all kinds of voltage fluctuations on the lines. It's going to cause safety problems for our utility linemen because they won't know if the system's down when they come out to fix lines. That problem got fixed. Then they found out it was actually stabilizing the grid instead of making it worse. So, oh, well, okay, stabilize the grid, but only up to 5% penetration. If you go beyond 5%, it's all hell's going to break loose, and blah, 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 blah. Now there's places in Germany, whole cities that are more than 5%. They run just fine. So it's like, oh, well, maybe it's 20%. 20% is what I meant. You can't go over 20%. And they just sort of this rear guard action. But it is true that there's some percentage point where it's not good. It's just not 5% like they said, or 0% like they said.
Hi. So yeah, I am the guy installing the modules on the roof. And from our perspective, one of the things that we see driving the cost of systems up is inconsistent regulations from city to city. And I'm wondering, given that a lower cost of installation would be great for SunPower's bottom line, to what extent is SunPower and maybe other manufacturers involved in getting a state standard or a national standard, not just for net metering agreements, but for construction and installation?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I can. I don't know. I mean, I know that we have people that work. Julie Blunden at SunPower is our governmental affairs person, and she's constantly in touch with all of the Solar Energy Industry Association and all of the regulatory bodies, and works those issues. But I know that there's other things you can do too that we're doing and others are doing. I don't know if there's the new Andale system from Akina, where and we have this thing called what is it? This super, I forget what it's called, which is trying to simplify the installation quite a bit. And one of the, historically, if you go back, PV modules were all pretty much the same. They had aluminum frame around them, a junction box, and pigtail leads coming out. And there was very little design thought into how it would be used. It was sort of a one module meets all. It could be going to Australia to power a water pump, or it could be put on your roof. And it was the same module, basically. I think one of the things you're seeing now is a specialization of modules that will be, and mounting systems, tailored for residential retrofit, tailored for commercial, that will take a lot of it out. And by the way, I didn't mean to say, it really is hard to install these things. One of the things we did when we got into the residential stuff is we had with these things called discovery days. Did you go on one of those, Jenya? Yeah. What was it like?
Yeah, pretty time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, we sent our engineers out to work with installers so that we could get feedback on how to change the module design to make it easier for them. And I don't remember how many teams we sent out, but it was a lot, like 20, something. And to a person, they came back and said, "This is really hard." This is a very laborious and difficult process. Is that right? Yeah, you see nothing yet.
So we're going to take a couple more questions before we hit on time. But Dick, are you willing to stay a little after to answer people's questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can have a beer.
You can have a beer now. We're going to take one over here by the right-hand wall.
What can the average homeowner do to push the net metering initiative along?
Wow. Julie, where are you when I need you? I think one of the things that we really need to do a little bit higher level is educate politicians about energy. This is, I've got a little book that a fellow's written in Indonesia on trying to educate people about energy. And I think it's called, he's trying to improve the energy literacy. And people really have very low energy literacy. We see that all the time because when we talk to a reporter, we'll say, well, we installed a 15 megawatt power plant in Nellis Air Force Base. It's like, okay, what's 15 megawatts? So we try and explain it, and finally they say, well, how many houses does it power? So then we come up with some bogus number of houses because, 15 megawatts means nothing. And then the article comes out, and you never know. He'll say it's a 15 megawatt hour power plant. What is a 15 megawatt hour? People, or another one was great. Is this will power 100,000 houses per year. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean the next year it's going to power 2,000 houses, or does it mean it's going to quit after? It's just like no clue about energy, and that translates into the elected officials, and it makes them very easy prey for the established oil industry, I think. So, energy literacy is certainly one, and then we have political action through. I know there's all kinds of interesting things. I'm just coming up a blank on how to get involved on it.
If you can think of them later, I'll post them on my website.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, in fact, I could talk to Julie and probably come up with a real nice list of ways to get involved in the helping the political process. We had a situation we thought we had the energy investment tax credit into the national energy bill that just went through Congress, and everybody wanted it. There's a 30% tax credit, which is existing now if you put a solar system in. It's going to expire at the end of 2008. So this was an extension of this tax credit. No brainer. Nancy Pelosi's 100% behind it. All of the Republicans are behind it. It's a no-brainer. Then the oil industry came in, and then I said, well, since the bill's got to be revenue neutral, we're going to take a tiny fraction of the oil depletion tax allowance credit that the oil industry gets and use it to fund this investment tax credit for solar, and they killed it right there. Just boom, dead. So there are big stakes politics going on out there, which people need to get involved so they can't. If you've ever, by the way, the oil depletion tax credit, if you ever want to really get sick, read how that works. Okay, it's unbelievable. Let me tell you how the oil depletion tax credit works. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but it's been in place since 1950s or something thereabouts. If an oil company drills and finds an oil field, okay, so let's suppose it costs them $100,000 to drill down and they find an oil field, they get to decide how big it is, and they have to decide how much it's worth, and they might decide the oil field they found is worth $1 billion, and they get to depreciate that. All right, so they get to take off of their tax 36% of that number every year, and the upshot is they don't pay tax. Right? So it's like we pay depreciation. We get depreciation as a manufacturer. If we build a factory, we can depreciate that factory over 5 years, okay, off of our income tax statement, say. But we can't depreciate everything we ever make in the factory. I mean, it's ludicrous. How you'd never pay anything. It's like our solar cell factory. We got to depreciate the 20 years of output of solar cells as a tax credit against it, and it's so strongly entrenched within the oil industry. In fact, the one book I read about it, the reason that the Democrats picked Lyndon Johnson to run with Kennedy was they knew he had the Texas strength to keep the oil depletion tax credit intact. Those kind of things.
We're going to take two more questions, one here, and then we have to wrap up.
Quick question. I couldn't quite tell on that battery park building what the solar panels were doing, but it almost looked like they were windows. And could you comment on technology that I think it's sort of thin film windows that's being installed, or is
yeah, you can make solar panels. These are not windows. This is sort of the mechanical thing up there. They're just on the side of the building, but you can make them semi-transparent. In the case of crystalline wafers like this, you can't make the wafer itself transparent, but you can make the panel semi-transparent by spacing the wafers out and having a transparent backsheet so that you can use it as like a skylight or a covered over a walkway shading structure. With thin film solar cells, you can actually make them thin enough that they are semi-transparent and they just let light through. Obviously, the more light you let through, the less you get to convert to electricity, so there's a trade-off.
All right, before we take our last question, I first want to thank everyone for coming out on Fat Tuesday / Super Tuesday to learn a little more about solar. So give yourselves a big hand for coming out and learn a little more about them. Everything you've heard, everything you've seen tonight will be on my website, Science Cafe SF, in the next week, including Dick's piece on how the cells actually work and the science behind it. I'll post all of that up so you can learn a little more about it through the website. And finally, I want to give a big hand to Atlas Cafe. They've been great tonight. Definitely tip them. If you haven't already, sign up for my mailing list, and that'll be up front here by the laptop. And I hope to see you in the next upcoming months where we'll be covering indoor air pollution, be covering nanotechnology and medicine. I'm going to finally get that cafe put together. And aging. And then for my anniversary in April, hopefully we're going to do Science of Beer. I'm confirming with Anchor Brewery to come out. So that's going to be a special one for only the hardcore fans like you that come out on these kinds of nights. So one last question for you before we wrap up.
I think this is a quick one. It's just a very practical question. How much of an efficiency hit does a panel take just from accumulation of dirt and dust? And how much is that? And the reason I ask that is you think about places like the Sahara or even San Francisco, it's a very dusty area. And the follow-up to that is, so is that addressed in the installation aspect, or is it in the module yourself, or do you just have to go out with a hose and take care of it as a homeowner?
Well, everybody does it differently. Most homeowners ignore it and they just let rain do it. So they lose performance during the summer until the winter rains clean the panel. And maybe, I don't know, it can be 5 to 20% depending on the site. Is that what you're seeing with your... Yeah, so it kind of the rule of thumb we use is the, for a decent site, it's 5% loss if you never clean it versus if you went out and cleaned it every day. For a bad site, it might be 20. That would be a very dusty, desert-blown winds like in Texas where they have the red dust. But most people don't. It's like anything else. You put it on your house and then you wash it a couple times and then you get tired of washing it.
Well, let's give Dick a big hand for coming out tonight. And
thank you very much. A wonderful series we're putting together here.
Well, I hope I'm going to drag you to another one. It won't be on solar power. It'll be something else that you're curious about.
The one on beer, I'll tell you.
Oh, yeah?
I'm just experimenting right now.
This Sun Power company really is the right company for me if the founder is saying he wants to learn more about the science of beer. So thank you again. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm going to be hanging out for a little while just taking down stuff. So if you have questions, suggestions for me, Dick's going to be hanging out for a few minutes too. So if you have more questions for him, just come up and talk to us. And I will see you next month. Yeah. Okay, at least you're